Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show, the KJP Show. My name is Kurosh, your host. And if you're not familiar with my show, I come to you with every episode to talk about indie games, elevating and celebrating them, and getting to talk to game developers as well and learning a bit more about their craft. And that's what kind of today's episode is going to be more focused on. I'm joined today by a very special guest who I was lucky enough to have join me on this episode. And we're going to get to know her and what her role is and everything she's involved in, has been and continues to be involved in games. So I'll throw the mic to you now, and if you'd like to share with myself and the audience who you are and what you do in video games.
Sure. My name is Brandii Grace. I've been in the game industry about 20 years and done what feels like everything. I've been a game designer, game programmer, game instructor, game producer, biz dev. I ran union movement. I was a higher up at the IGDA. I've kind of done a little bit of everything, including now I'm starting up my own solo dev indie studio where I'm about to launch my first game. And it's interesting because a lot of people talk about solo dev when they're still actually working with other people through contracts and other stuff. But I'm actually doing everything. All the art, all the code, all the writing, all the design, all the everything is music. Everything is my work.
Wow. Honestly, like a Renaissance woman in the space then.
We are rare, but we do exist. Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing work. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk, and this conversation, I want to make sure for the audience members isn't going to be, I guess, about anything specific, but it's more so kind of a career of your whole body of work and just your experiences throughout, and not necessarily any one specific game. And so, like with that, I'd like to ask you, what have been some of those, like you mentioned, you said that it's rare. Like, what are some of the challenges that you've seen or in when you first got into the gaming industry as a whole, like in those first days?
Well, so it's important to recognize that in this industry, things change a lot in a very short time frame. Every few years brings new challenges and new opportunities. Obviously, we've seen the industry turmoil in this last couple of years is something we've actually never really seen before. At best, you could talk about the early 80s crash of the industry, but this is kind of above and beyond that because it's actually not just local to Western spaces.
And what, just to clarify, what you're referring to is a lot of the major layoffs and everything in and around that and more.
Closures. Yep. People in this space are unable to find jobs, and we're seeing just a ridiculous turnover, despite the fact that the industry is more profitable than it's ever been. Developers are just getting hurt left and right. And it's not the usual layoff cycle that we see where underperforming studios are going under. We just saw recently Microsoft, for example, completely shuttered a studio that was successfully profiting by over $25 million on what was last year considered a award-winning top-tier game. And those people, they succeeded in publishing something that was amazing and profitable, and they still got shut down and lost their jobs. So and they were a studio out of Japan. So again, this is worldwide, and it does not matter how good a studio is, how profitable a studio is, how kind of anything. Every studio and every developer at some level is suffering. And
the challenges these days are not as much as they are individual and specific to areas or specific to aspects of the work. They are just as much global and internationally affecting everyone is what I'm
correct. Wow. We're seeing a lot of things like we've had challenges in the mobile space that are separate from challenges we're seeing in the console space, because like in mobile, ad revenue is severely down, as well as mobile developers have been kind of squeezed by the fact that it costs a lot more to get people to play your game than it does to make your game, which is not how it was in the beginning. And they're not making as much money on ads because of a variety of different reasons. So they're struggling. The AAA console space is getting more expensive and more hit driven than ever before, and customers have tighter belts right now, so they're not spending on these big titles the way they once were. It's just, this is a challenge space now, but every few years there's a new challenge. There's a new indie apocalypse. There's a new console cycle problem. There's a new, like, when I first started, one of the big challenges was you just couldn't do a game without a huge team spending months or years building everything from scratch. Nowadays, we have tools like Unity and Unreal and Godot that anybody can grab and make a game. And we didn't used to have that. The art tools are better, the music tools are better, and there's a lot more stuff out there that people can use and develop so that people who are solo or duo teams can make a game, and a fairly good and fairly profitable one at that.
And would you say, I guess I have a question in that regard, in regards to challenges then and now, and depending on whether you're in a AAA or in the indie space, do you feel like in that contrast between the larger companies and the larger publishers, developers, the tools to succeed are different than that of an indie developer, or are they similar?
Yes.
Where do they similar? Where do they differ from your perspective?
So in some ways, game development is game development. There's a lot of differences in the larger space, both in terms of how the team acts and also the tools that you're using. For example, a small indie team is unlikely to be using Houdini, which is extremely expensive art side technology. But they're also at an indie side probably not doing things like full motion capture and having to do cutscenes that line up some star actor's face with exactly mapping to the mouth movements in some cutscene. Those are the kinds of things that you'll see in the AAA space, as well as a lot of niche specialization. I know one person at EA, basically his entire career was just modeling basketball players' feet. That's it. Because as soon as he was done with one team, he'd move on to the next team. And as soon as he was done with all the teams, time for the next NBA game. So he'd just go basketball players' feet all day, every day, all he did. At a smaller indie space, and this is another difference, indie is relative. It used to be, it originally was just anybody not working with a publisher, then it was anybody with a budget of less than 200,000, and now we have specializations of like indie and III indie. Yeah, so there's you've got something like Team Cherry that did Hollow Knight, and they're going to be considered III, or they're the big indies, versus smaller indies, where some of them are making maybe $600 a year if they're lucky, and some of them are making 45 million a year. So it just depends on what level of indie work.
I see. I didn't realize that there are subcategories within that space as well.
Yeah, and in the indie space, it's it feels a lot more lottery ticket than it used to be. You aren't necessarily going to make any money, and a lot of indie development for a successful, sustainable indie studio has to be about picking and choosing projects to spend your time on so that you can actually afford to pay rent and pay checks for everybody. I know a lot of indie developers that they will split their time between making their next small indie game and working on a licensed title for, you know, some like Paramount or Disney or something like that. And sometimes indie studios will work together with each other to get stuff done in co-development spaces. One of the big challenges right now is also there's no funding going around. There's a handful of small funding spaces that are popping up, which is good, but it's definitely becoming more of a challenge. And even major games with major players in them are struggling. I know one game that raised $45 million. They're very close to launch on a huge project. They need another 15 million, and I'm guessing they have like some top names everybody here would know. And I'm guessing they didn't get the 15 million because I saw they laid off a couple of their founders. So it's a tough space. And you can see that there's also, like we were talking about the range. So there's an indie funding group that Innersloth just did called Outer Sloth. They say on there they fund between 50,000 and 2 million.
Okay.
So the idea that 2 million is an indie budget is realistic for today, but years ago that was a AAA budget.
Yeah, the perspective changes over time.
Yes, it does. And so these are kind of some of the shifts that we see over time. And it like I said, it presents challenges and opportunities as things change.
Okay.
So that's some of it. For me personally, other changes that I've seen and challenges and opportunities has come along with being a female developer.
Yeah, if you could speak to that, please.
Yeah, one of the big changes we've seen in recent years is just government willingness to go after extremely toxic companies. And some of the stuff that people find really shocking that have happened at these major studios, I'm like, yeah, that's a Tuesday. I know myself and others who have, let's just say, it's bad enough that I have a friend in the pharmaceutical space. I showed her just some of the stuff that I've gone through, and she's like, no, that doesn't really happen. And I'm like, no, this happened to me. And she's like, no, that would be lawsuits, and HR would stop that, and they would do this. And I'm like, I guess in pharmaceuticals, good, but not here. This is openly problematic stuff that we've seen and that I've experienced personally.
That's awful. And so that
Yeah.
has that permeated throughout the entirety of your experiences, or has that evolved and changed, or in any hopefully not worse ways, but has it gotten in any better directions, or I don't know?
Some has gotten better, some has not. I will say, very recently I had a team that wanted to hire me, and they weren't allowed to hire me. I know them well enough that I know exactly what the reasons are, and the higher ups actually in person agreed, yes, this is why we didn't hire you, which has nothing to do with my abilities. But I will just say it is a violation of federal anti-discrimination laws that they chose not to hire me. So
that still exists then.
That still exists, and what's surprising to me is how open some of them will be about it. It feels like it used to be a lot more like it was there, but it was a gotcha. Like I have a friend who was at a major company, and twice she had bosses who were saying extremely awful sexist stuff to her and restricting her ability to do her job based on sexist things. And she just said, well, as a girl, I'm not smart enough to remember that. Could you send it to me in email? And they're like, sure, sweetie. And then they sent her an email with all this like really illegal sexist stuff in it. And she just forwarded it to HR twice. So
wow.
it used to be a thing where there was kind of more of a gotcha, but now there's, in some spaces, there's more of a, yeah, we know, we don't care.
Just like a negligence or just a dismissal of it almost.
A little bit, yeah. And I'm not saying that's permeated everywhere, but that has kind of been persistent. Some of the ones I see nowadays, not just with me, but with other women, are things where it's like, oh, we don't want to hire women who might be pregnant or might be getting pregnant. I've seen women who announce they're pregnant and then suddenly their contracts are stopped. Wow. I actually have an email from a major place that I won't name, and I'm just keeping it where they explicitly tell me that they're not going to hire me because I'm pregnant. So back when I was pregnant, it's just, there is a lot of that, and yeah.
If I may ask, are you aware of any efforts, or are there any things, like, if for someone that who may be a woman and is interested in coming into game space, like, what do you have advice for them, or what from your experience, like, is there anything you would impart to?
And this isn't just for women, this is for anybody who is in any type of minority position.
Yeah, okay, that'd be good.
You have to make decisions about what you're willing to accept. I'm not going to tell somebody that they're wrong if they say, I won't work at this company because of toxicity. I'm also not going to say somebody's wrong for deciding that they need to pay rent and take a job that's toxic. I think that I'm further along, and even in this terrible, tumultuous time, I have a little more privilege that I can be more choosy. I have pulled out of interviews because I found out who the hiring manager was, and I know how awful they are. And I know a lot of people don't have that level of privilege to do that. So you also have to decide, when you come across somebody who's being either explicitly or implicitly discriminatory, what do you want to do? If you decide you want to stand up to them, there's the tactful awareness. Oh, I don't know if you knew, this is actually so there's this law that this would be a problem with. You know, you can try the helping to help make them understand what they've said is wrong. And then there's, you know, standing up to them and being like, no, this is sexist, this is wrong, this is unacceptable. You know, those are choices, and being quiet is a choice. But I will say one thing I learned. When it comes to going a legal route, you get one. I went through a legal issue that was unrelated to discrimination based on gender or harassment or anything like that. It was a labor case. And I found out from that one of the things the opposition can do is they can gather and subpoena any other cases you've ever brought for discrimination, harassment, any of that stuff. And if there is one or any of them, they will use the prior existing cases against you as evidence that, oh, this person is just litigating frivolously or this person makes stuff up. It is used against you. So you basically get one, because if you have more than one, too many of the times people will not believe that this kind of horrific thing could happen more than once, even though it does. So you have to make choices. If you go the legal route, you can try it more than once, but as soon as you do it once, there are consequences in that you've cut yourself off from doing it again, potentially. There are also a lot of jobs that restrict you to only arbitrary mandatory arbitration, where you don't get to be in front of a jury, and those have a 98% rate of going in favor of the company, regardless of what happened. You also have issues of reputation, that if you sue people, if you go the legal route, you can develop a reputation, and our industry is very network heavy and network based. I also recommend very much for anybody of any minority status to find other people like you. There's women in games, there's blacks in games, there's neurodiversity in games, there's gays in games, there's all of these are like names of organizations that you can look up and find.
And I mean, I kind of wanted to take in that direction of another question I have. I'm from the outside. I mostly, you know, I talk to game developers. I talk about video games. I see it from the outside, but and I always hear in the news, and I'm keeping up with, like, oh, you know, the first unionization to help protect gamers and stuff, or not gamers, game developers and those that work in the industry to have something more stable. I've only heard anecdotally about that, and so I guess from your perspective, like, do you see efforts in that kind of overlapping into this space to help with providing protection, to help with providing some level of support network in numerous ways? I don't know, like, could you speak to any of that? Or
yeah, it's starting. Back when I was a higher up with the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, I was one of the heads doing volunteer directing for all the international events. There was an attitude back then. IGDA even had an FAQ where they were talking about unions, and they're like, IGDA is not a union and never will be. So they were very strong about that, and the anti-union sentiment was pretty strong in many spaces of the industry. And that has slowly changed over the years. So I got involved a little bit with the Game Workers Unite, and I talked to some of the leaders there, and I said, hey, I think that something that would really help you is to be connected with a larger existing union that can bring in the resources you need. So I facilitated the connection between Game Workers United and the CWA, which became Code, the first major union movement for games. And now IATSE, and now IATSE is in the space. So CWA and IATSE are the two that are kind of majorly running it. Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA also had their spaces that they worked within, and I worked with both of them. But it has moved very swiftly in the last few years from very anti-union to tepidly, maybe some of us should quietly, privately consider unions, to people openly like, unionize now, and unions popping up. I don't think unions are the end-all be-all, fix-all of everything, but they are useful. We have seen people who think it's a panacea are going to be disappointed, but I think having them is necessary in a lot of spaces. You know, I often point to New York Public Radio recently. They announced 12% layoffs, and then their union pushed back and they only did 6% layoffs. So the union didn't stop the layoffs, but they cut them in half. So unions are there to be helpful, and unions, just like businesses or governments or any other group, are only as strong and as good as the people who run them. So you can have a bad, crappy union if you have bad, crappy leadership. And you can have an amazing union if you have amazing leadership. I think Personally, some of the problems with SAG-AFTRA is that they had Ronald Reagan running it for a while. It just depends on who's running the thing.
Right. It's an additional tool in the belt, not the
right.
whole end all save all kind of thing.
Right. And you have to, different unions are gonna have different models, so you have to find a model that works for your company. And there's a lot of legal issues people don't recognize. Like, you cannot be in a union for a company if you have the ability to hire, fire, or promote, or if you have access to personal information about employees. So if my indie studio grows and I have employees and they want to unionize, I can support that, and I can sign off on it and not make it hard on them, but I can't join it and I can't be a part of it. I also can't insist on it. I can only open the door and be like, yes, I will support it, and then actively support it. So it's, so there's a lot of legal issues there. I would also caution anybody, if you were thinking about unionizing, you have to start paying attention to politics, because what rights and restrictions exist for your unionization depends on what administration is in power. The federal administration, basically the president, is in charge of the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, and they get to decide who's on it and not. So they also get to put in different laws. And it just so happens that when union-friendly administrations are in, you have a lot more rights that are taken away under non-union friendly administrations. So you have to start paying attention to politics before you do that.
Okay. I kind of wanted to ask you a few questions as well, if you don't mind, in your time and your experiences with as an educator and an instructor in some ways. Is it okay if we shift in that direction?
Yes.
So in that, can you, I guess, talk a little bit about what kind of institutions you worked in? Were you involved? How was it like developing a curriculum? And over what period of time was that journey like? And how was it like as a whole, I guess, to start?
Fun. So I guess my educational journey actually started while I was a college student. I was so focused on video games and video game development in college that everybody knew it, to the point that one of my professors, when I raised my hand, was like, "Yes, Brandii, what about video games?" I was the CS student that was all about games. Everybody knew it. I ran the game club, that kind of thing. I worked with some of the instructors because they saw that a game development class as a 101 might be a good thing to offer to get kids interested in moving into computer science. So I helped them develop some of the early classes and pointed the instructors toward tools and ideas and stuff like that. So I kind of had this like developing curriculum thing even back then.
You were just like beta testing it. You're like, I'm gonna test it out here and see how it goes and picks up. Okay.
Like, oh yeah, I was working as an advisor, I guess, on it while I was in college. So it was fun. It was interesting to see the class come out and work the way it did. When I was on my third year in the industry, I was invited to give a guest lecture at DigiPen, and I did. And it turned out that the dean was sitting in watching. And as soon as I was done, he pulled me aside and he's like, "We want to hire you."
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was shocked because I didn't have a master's degree and I thought that was required, and it was not.
Oh, okay.
I got hired full time at DigiPen, and I taught a bunch of classes there, created some of my own, and then they were working on a game design degree, so I helped develop that.
And that degree did not exist prior?
Right.
Oh wow. And so when you're involved with that, to whatever you're able to speak to, like, what did you see, I guess, in the industry, or that you felt was essential in game development that was maybe lacking, or that you're like, this needs to be like key elements of it? Like, could you talk, I guess, a little bit of that?
Yeah. So I mean, specifically with the DigiPen one, which is the first degree I made with other people, they had the game programming degree, which is called their RTIS, real-time interactive simulation, and they had the game art degree, but they didn't have game design. And there was a lot of fights back then about whether a game designer is born a designer or can be made. In other words, like, are you training people who can never be game designers and giving them this hope that won't come to fruition? And my argument was, whether someone has a natural inclination toward being a good game designer or not, you still have to train them to be better. And so that was the direction we went with. Okay, let's be very picky about who gets in, but then the people who get into the design degree, we're going to make them the best designers we can.
Okay.
So that was a part of it. Since then, I've worked on a lot of other degree programs for a lot of other places, and there's a lot of things that I've run into. One of the big issues is a lot of classes, especially ones that aren't taught by experts in the industry, lack a comprehensive or realistic approach to how video games are actually made. There's a very big difference between a tiny little game that you make in your spare time at a weekend game jam and a 3-year-long 300-person project that ships. Like, it's just the scope and size of it is so different. And so because of it, it's hard for non-professionals to really understand what they aren't teaching when they're just teaching you how to do the code, how to do the art, how to do the sound.
Okay.
There's also a big piece missing across so many programs, regardless, is some of the legal aspects.
Right. I was going to ask, I had another guest on once, and they're either, I believe they're currently still a faculty member at DigiPen. And one of the things I was asking was, in today's day and age, with so much more accessibility to indie development, I'd imagine there needs to be some more curriculum for the legal and or business sides of things to be kind of like caught up on it, as opposed to maybe in the earlier days where it was just like, as I imagine, is like just focus on making a game and like the aspects of that. So could you, what about the legal aspects? Is it addressing, I guess?
So the fact that patents exist, and so there are game design principles and concepts that are patented, and you have to not violate those. But even just very basic, an understanding of licenses and license compatibility. Like when I'm working on my solo dev stuff, I do use a lot of resources like Godot and plugins and stuff that are free and open source. And I absolutely know every single license to every single item and scrap of anything I grab. I am very specific about things have to be either MIT licensed or Apache 2.0 or CC0, and that's it. If it's CC and it requires something else, nope, it has to be CC0 only. So I'm very good at making sure that I know what those compatibilities are. Even with my tools, I make very clear if this is like GPL, does that mean that it is one where the output is freely mine, or does that have to be released under it? I'm very, very careful about these things. Okay. And a lot of students aren't. A lot of them don't even understand, so they'll grab stuff off the internet. I've had students, one of my favorites was these students showed their project and they showed me the dinosaur for their game, and I just glared at them and I said, "That's Spike." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "That's Spike from My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic." And they're like, no, this is our original art. I'm like, you drew a thing on his back and changed his colors. It's Spike. Here's the original photo of him I know you used. Students do that, and they don't think that their teachers know anything. They're so used to dealing with like their high school students who maybe know who Pikachu is and maybe know who Mario is, and that's it. Yeah. So they're like, what? Why would you possibly know what Balatro is? Why would you possibly know? I'm an industry expert. I know these things.
And I mean, that as funny as it is, I think I'd imagine it's going to be even more complicated and multifaceted as we now are stepping into the space more and more of AI and how that like is aggregating things, and like, oh, if you're using these tools, your art is like without knowing, like it's not even necessarily using someone else's, but now yours is, you lose your rights to it, or all those aspects of it, I'd imagine.
I was talking to a lot of lawyers about AI during the Games Beat conference, because they were all over the place, and it was just fun hearing the different perspectives. So first of all, we have to remember AI is a marketing term. There is no intelligence out there in any of the tech. It's just algorithms. But what the algorithms do, how they function, they do matter, and the training data is going to be an interesting thing, because Europe has their look at it where you have to be very transparent about the training data. Here you don't, but we're waiting. A lot of lawyers pointed out that the Copyright Office is about to drop their next round of clarity on copyrightability, and a lot of them are on, whether they like it or hate it, are believing that the Copyright Office is actually going to be a lot more skewed toward being pro AI than anti.
Interesting.
So we'll have to see how that goes.
I think this goes to your point earlier too about like the industry just constantly having changes, and
Yeah.
this is, you know, and who knows what else, but like at least this other kink is probably going to be coming up, if not already here.
I will say, I think that anybody who thinks you can just type in some words and get production ready anything is fooling themselves. The few people I know who have used quote unquote AI to work on their stuff, they put so much work into it, they might as well have just started from scratch. They're using it as tools. Whether or not that is ethical, whether or not that is legal is not the question for me to answer, but
it's its own can of worms, its own little separate
but it's certainly not I typed in some words and then a game popped out or a game asset popped out. Like it's either concept art or it's like improvements of existing art, and watching some of the stuff you can find online is very interesting. But yeah, the art isn't good on its own. The writing isn't good on its own. So I don't really think it's going to replace all the human labor that people fear it will. I don't think it's good enough, and I don't think it's going to get good enough soon enough.
Yeah, people are, I guess there's a level of intelligence that just innately tells you like this doesn't feel good or right, or
right, exactly.
We're nearing like the closing minutes. I just wanted to know, like, within a brief message, if you were to say to a new someone coming into the industry or someone interested in the industry, would you have any final thoughts to share with them?
Yeah. So if they're looking to get into the industry right this minute, this is a time to work on your portfolio more than it is a time to start applying for jobs. If I could leave one big message with everybody who's interested, it's remember. Don't forget how the studios acted. Don't forget how they treated you. Don't forget that they're shutting down great developers and great studios regardless of profitability. Don't forget that they said they were going to support their developers and be remote and then force everyone back into office. Don't forget that they said we care about diversity and then cut all the diversity programs. Don't forget that everything we've seen. And if you're a student on campus, don't forget what's happening on campus. Don't forget what it looks like with the cops coming in and how they're treating people. Don't forget about the companies who have decided we're going to blanketly punish everybody who goes to this school, regardless of what they did or not. These are things that it's easy to sweep under the rug. It's easy to forget. And when you get older, when you're my age, it's important not to look back and be like, well, I was right when I did this, but the students of today are wrong, because, like, really don't forget.
Well, that's what I would say. Thank you, Brandii, for that message. I appreciate that. And thank you again for joining me on the show today. I appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll be seeing more of each other. I can't exactly yet share at what time and what day, but in some form we will be sharing the stage at San Diego Comic-Con this year, and so I'm excited for that. So please look out for more info on that. Is there any final thing you'd like to plug or say?
Well, come see us at Comic-Con, because he's awesome, so you have to come see him. I'm just an add-on. If you want to see the kind of stuff I'm doing now, I've got a website, 3daysgame.com. So that's,
yes, I'll make sure to plug that.
Thank you. And hopefully I will come back and talk about that sometime in the near future too.
Yeah, I'd love to have. I feel like there's so many more things I'd love to pick your brain about. So
yeah, please do. I love doing this.
Thank you again for coming. And until next time, everyone, thank you for joining me on today's show.
Bye, everyone.